Look at these frames. These are new buildings that could well be left. But a real estate market crisis has erupted in China, where sales have been falling for several months now. Because of this, it becomes cheaper for builders to demolish the new building than to maintain it. The authorities back the demolitions, covering the costs. Already 2/3 of the builders are bankrupt or are on the verge of bankruptcy. And here's another news. The Chinese chip manufacturer has achieved a 7-nanometer technological breakthrough, on par with AI. It took the Chinese company 2 years to jump from 14 nanometers to 7 nanometers, which is faster than AI. Experts claim that they have learned to produce 7-nanometer chips, even without the most modern production equipment. So what is really happening in such a seemingly understandable China? In this documentary, you will see this mysterious country from many angles, and such a review will allow a multifaceted perspective that will be closest to reality. In fact, you can give this assessment yourself after watching, writing in the comments what you think about it. So let's get started. To this day, China is successfully implementing the most unprecedented reforms that have no analogues in the world. Their success is largely due to financing through state banks, under the control of which are 90% of China's finances. Corruption is an unavoidable part of Chinese culture, stemming from its clan-based power system. In short, the scheme for today is as follows. There is a whole cast of high-ranking state managers, so-called princes. Mainly, these are the children and nephews of Mao Zedong's comrades, who together with the great helmsman built the modern People's Republic of China and formed a new Chinese elite. Behind such a prince stands his own elite group of clans with their political and business interests, a set of influence tools, and a joint administrative resource of duties, which his representatives occupy. In turn, these clans are united into more global elite corporations. Traditionally, there were two such so-called princelings, the successors of the old Beijing party elite and the Shanghai clique, which mainly absorbed the offspring of the Chinese elites of the 90s. Recently, a third independent elite corporation has emerged. The clan of Xi Jinping, formerly belonging to the Shanghainese, but having separated from them and ambitiously growing the power of his own clan, has divided all spheres of influence in China among themselves. They control business, including the Shadow One. A complex and tangled political economic system, a combination of market and socialist principles, specific relations with Hong Kong, the special status of Taiwan, and many other characteristic features of the Chinese economy create a huge shadow market, which is under the control of clans. And this is not to mention the rapidly growing economy, oriented both towards export and a huge domestic market. The latest developments, modernization of the armed forces, their own space program, which create unseen-before flows of money and opportunities for personal enrichment of officials. So all these stories about the execution of corrupt officials in China, to put it mildly, do not correspond to reality. Otherwise, in 25 years, China has become the world's leader in gross domestic product. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and even the CIA acknowledge this. The figures at the aforementioned organizations vary slightly, from $17 trillion at the CIA to $18 trillion at the International Monetary Fund. Americans are generally sad. A United States Senate investigation revealed that China supplies over 1 million different types of parts to the country's defense industry. Computer equipment is at the top of the list of Chinese exports to the United States of America. The list of American exports to China is headed by scrap metal and industrial waste. A familiar situation, isn't it? China has peacefully taken over African countries in addition to actively investing in the West. Participating in the construction of car and railway roads, airports, linking all 54 countries into a single infrastructure, China has invested in thousands of African projects. Its peaceful annexation has spread to agriculture, infrastructure facilities, processing industry, and logistics. China has the world's largest reserves of 17 types of useful minerals. In fact, it is the only raw material superpower in the world, not Russia, as many think. For example, In 1 year in China, nearly 80% of the world's volume of rare earth metals is mined, of which gold is 15%. China has the world's largest reserves of natural gas, and in terms of coal mining and consumption, it is in first place. In recent years, China has produced 49% of the world's steel, 54% of pig iron, 47% of coal, 50% of iron ore, and 60% of cement. China produced more cement in 3 years than the United States of America did in a century, according to calculations. The quantity would have been enough to entirely cover Hawaii in concrete. The only thing that China seriously lacks is natural gas and oil, which it is forced to import from several countries, including Russia. Indeed, the inflated power of Siberia gas pipeline turned out to be uncommercial, as the Minister of Energy characterized it back in 1700. After all, this project will not pay off until at least 2048. But for China, it is not vitally necessary. For them, it's a backup option. And as the only buyers, they can dictate their price. Gas specialists consider the gas pipeline similar to the Sakhalin-Khabarovsk-Vladivostok pipeline opened in 2011, a costly show-off that turned out to be unnecessary for anyone. It is often heard that if China is the world's factory, then the environmental situation here is the most severe. This is partially true, however. This information is a bit outdated. Firstly, in recent years, the Chinese government has halted the operation of tens of thousands of factories across the country. Many chemical industries are being systematically closed or launched, again, with planned modernization. All toxic chemical industry productions are being moved beyond the city limits. Secondly, harmful productions are being exported to significantly less profitable countries. Governments which are willing to turn a blind eye to black snow and pink rivers in exchange for generous Chinese credits. For example, in just one province of Hebei, more than 700 companies producing steel and cement, which are some of the dirtiest industries, have moved their capacities to neighboring countries in Central and Southeast Asia. One of the companies bought assets of a bankrupt steel mill in Serbia and invested $300 million in its reconstruction. And with Kazakhstan, agreements have been concluded for more than $20 billion on the terms and volumes of Chinese loans when transferring production enterprises to the territory of Kazakhstan or the construction of new ones. After all, if anything, China knows how to build. In 20 years, China has increased the length of its highways tenfold. Out of 330,000 kilometers of high-speed roads in the world, 130,000 belong to China. More than 300 bridges have been built in China, and half of the 10 largest bridges in the world are located in this country. In addition, this requires the highest qualification of engineers and a high level of engineering education. The longest viaduct in the world, 164 whole and 8/10 kilometers long, listed in the Guinness Book of Records, is designed for the Chinese high-speed railway. And the railway stations in China, in Guangzhou, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Wuhan, and many other cities far surpass in size and comfort the largest stations in Europe. The Chinese Three Gorges hydroelectric power station is the largest in the world with 22,000 megawatts. China is successfully implementing a grandiose program for the study and development of the moon. Even Antarctica is not forgotten, where 5 permanent polar stations have been opened in recent years. The outbreak of the coronavirus undoubtedly affected China's economy. Its losses in the first quarter of the 20th year were about 1% of the country's gross domestic product. Meanwhile, the country's leaders consistently emphasize the transient and brief nature of the epidemic's effects. And there are serious grounds for such a statement. The construction of hospitals clearly demonstrates China's capabilities. It is impressive that a new hospital, designed for 1,500 places, was built just a few days after the first hospital for 1,000 places, with modern medical equipment and special isolation boxes, began to admit patients. However, for global leadership, one economic power is not enough. An idea that meets the interests of the global community is also needed. And in this sense, China, in the best traditions of puppet masters, can only offer an electronic digital concentration camp, which is already practically implemented in its own country. This system was most fully tested on the Uyghur Muslims. The people, who are part of the most populous national minority, were forbidden to develop their own languages and literacy. preserve or reform national customs, which caused mass protests. In 2009, in the capital of Xinjiang, Urumqi, the police tried to disperse a crowd agitated by the murders of Uyghur workers in South China. The riots escalated into pogroms. 197 people were killed, mostly Chinese. The authorities arrested 1,000 protesters, at least 30 of whom were sentenced to execution. In response, the Uyghurs engaged in basic, disorganized, but frequent acts of terrorism. In 2018, China first announced the existence of re-education centers where Uyghurs and other Muslims, for example Kazakhs, are helped to straighten out their thoughts and correct their behavior. Re-education is not considered a criminal punishment in China. Formal charges are not brought. Accordingly, there are no statistics. Despite this, the extent of repression is apparent even from across the border, with the camps visible in satellite images. There is minimal information as many areas in China, especially Xinjiang, remain inaccessible to foreign media workers. They discuss not only tortures and physical punishments, but also organ trafficking. The United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination directly called Xinjiang a territory reminiscent of one gigantic concentration camp, assuming that 1 million people are imprisoned in transformation centers. The World Uyghur Congress believes that the real figure could reach 3 million, almost a third of the entire population. The remaining 2/3 live under constant video surveillance and total control, moving to the neighboring district. After scanning the grid, they are required to have a special tracking app on their smartphones, so you won't be able to complain in the messengers either. In general, everything is in the best traditions of dystopias. On the crest of these events, the emergence of an idea, dubbed in Beijing with the nebulous term social credit system, seems quite logical. In the year 2016, at a Politburo meeting, Chairman Xi Jinping declared, "To combat the acute problem of trust deficit, we need to perfect both the mechanisms for encouraging law-abiding and good citizens and the mechanisms for punishment, so that a person simply would not dare to lose trust." The corresponding technologies have been developed, and now every resident of mainland China is evaluated by the specified system in real time, receiving a trust rating. All its residents are given a starting rating with a certain number of points. Whether it will rise or fall depends directly on the behavior of each individual. If the rating is high, it's a model citizen, entitled to various benefits, for example, to receive a large interest-free loan. Below average, expect unpleasantness. For example, you could be fired from a public service job. At the lowest mark, a person becomes an outcast. They can't find a job, take out a loan, or buy tickets. People will avoid him more than a coronavirus carrier. The clear rules are not yet established. Government organizations, police, and local authorities are monitoring citizens. In addition, data is collected and stored by 8 private companies, the most famous of which is Alibaba Group. With the help of smart glasses, the police can identify a person in 2 to 3 minutes by scanning their face and connecting to the database. Only the Society of Total Control knows no boundaries. An electronic concentration camp, like any other, represents complete submission to the ruling regime. Chinese citizens are becoming the unified elements written about in the Tryst Committee. They will be reduced to the level and behavior of trained animals. Tourists visiting China have a secret app installed on their smartphones by border guards. It collects data to track content that is banned in China. In China, freedom of speech is guaranteed by the Constitution. But in practice, any sources of information, including foreign films, books, and video games imported into the country, are subject to state control. According to the Press Freedom Index, China ranked 176th out of 180 countries in terms of media independence. Most of the population doesn't see this as a major problem, and much of this is tied to historical traditions. China's first emperor, who unified the nation, commanded the burning of all books from conquered regions, sparing only texts on medicine, divination, and agriculture. And he banned all philosophical currents, except for the doctrine, at the heart of which was the unquestioning execution of state laws. There are advantages to total control, although they may seem dubious to some. Remember how the digital girl from The Matrix Reloaded changed outfits? Similar scenes are cut in China due to censorship. However, this is changing. Usually, films in China were released about a month after the world premiere. until the party reviews and approves the material. However, now films start before the world premiere, like Pacific Rim 2, for example. And all because the franchise was bought by the Chinese, now the film does not need to be censored, as it is shot according to Chinese laws. So the bosses of the Chinese film industry began to buy up promising projects in batches. The Chinese market is expanding rapidly, with 5 times more potential viewers than the United States of America, leading Hollywood to increasingly adapt to Chinese distribution rules. Terminator Genesis made a large part of the box office in China. Releases are getting closer to the Chinese New Year, and a Chinese woman is playing in Transformers. It's much easier not to cut an already made movie, but to release it initially suitable for the format of the largest market. It is widely believed that corruption in China is low due to the relentless and ongoing efforts to combat it. The death penalty threatens any official involved in corrupt activities, thanks to which the economy in China works tens of times more effectively. Deaths without a corrupt component are several orders of magnitude lower in price than similar ones in Russia. Is this so or not? In just 10 minutes, we will thoroughly sort out this issue. The information at the end of the video may surprise you. Let's get started. Real corruption came to China along with the Europeans. That's the history. After being defeated in the First and Second Opium Wars with the British, China was forced to sign the Treaty of Nanking, which, in addition to a huge contribution, secured the rights of the British to conduct virtually unrestricted trade activity in China. In fact, these agreements legalized the corruption mechanisms established by the British smugglers, which encouraged and nurtured total corruption among Chinese officials. And the weak imperial power, after 2 devastating military defeats, did not dare to resist these processes. The image of a treacherous official who helps foreigners rob China and at the same time thrives on the exploitation of the people has firmly taken root in Chinese culture. At the same time, despite systemic Western corruption, China has always had its own traditions of enrichment at the expense of the state treasury and the corrupt use of official positions. This is related to the fact that the basis of the Chinese mentality is a special role of family ties, where loyalty to one's family prevails over all other values. For example, in Confucian doctrines, reverence for parents is even placed higher than loyalty to the state and the law. Private family and community ties require assistance to relatives and community members, and this assistance must be provided, especially if someone from the family has obtained a good position. Career growth of a successful person in China is perceived as, first and foremost, the result of the activity of his entire family, and only secondarily as his personal merit. In ancient China, a reverse nobility system existed where successful officials bestowed nobility upon their parents and grandparents, contrary to the European practice of inheriting titles through service. It is understandable that a Chinese official who has made a career will always help his family in every way possible, including using all the resources of his position. In society, it is perfectly acceptable if an official gives preferences to his relative in commerce, uses his administrative resources for his benefit, and hires relatives. In the family, nepotism is not only not condemned, but, on the contrary, is accepted as a duty. A similar loyalty is characteristic and in relation to the phenomenon, which in our society is called bribery, giving a part of the profit to the person thanks to whose efforts a profitable deal was made, is part of Chinese business culture. Such a business culture permeates Chinese society to the very top. If at the grassroots level nepotism has a family character, then at the top of the political system, huge clans of officials operate. In fact, Xi Jinping, the current leader of China, is the son of Mao Zedong's comrade Xi Zhongxun. That is, in our words, a boy major. Last year, the United States of America fell behind China for the first time in terms of the number of wealthy people. As per the annual report, among the 10% of the world's wealthiest people, 100 million are Chinese. In the United States of America, this figure is 99 million people. Remember the famous Panama Papers scandal about offshore accounts, from which the most unexpected story for Russians turned out to be about the cellist Roldigin? After that, he was even referred to as Putin's wallet. So, the same Panama Papers also revealed information about the Chinese ruling clans. Among the high-ranking owners of offshore companies are Jasmine Li, granddaughter of Chinese leader Jia Qinglin, Xi Jinping's brother-in-law, daughter of the Standing Committee of the Politburo Li Peng, wife of Bo Xilai, former member of the Politburo, brother of former Vice President Zheng Qinghong, and son of former Politburo member Tian Jiyun, and many, many others. In a settled clan political system, the struggle between powerful elite groups for resources and money flows, especially in the conditions of a constantly growing economy, is inevitable. And the fight against corruption, all these public executions of corrupt officials, are largely a tool for cleaning up enemies and suppressing rebellious elite groups. A large-scale campaign against corruption began with the coming to power of the People's Republic of China, President Xi Jinping. Since then, 1.5 million officials have been punished for violating party discipline and corruption. Before Xi Jinping, the Chinese authorities preferred to punish corrupt officials leniently. The Criminal Code of the Underworld contains 45 articles, providing for the highest measure of punishment. The arrival of Xi Jingtao and Jian Zemin, executions were regularly carried out in China. In 2011, for example, high-ranking party members, bonds, vice mayors of 2 major cities, were shot. But in 6 years of Xi Jinping's rule, Chinese officials have become accustomed to different rules. Only one vice mayor of the city of Luoyang, Zhang Junshin, was executed for taking a total of $160 million in bribes. Executions were halted in general. However, cases against corrupt officials increased exponentially. Under Xi Jinping, a new special service has been effectively created to fight corruption, called the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection. This commission is more influential than the police, state security, and other special services of the country. It has its own investigative bodies, prisons, and is headed by a member of the Politburo Standing Committee, one of the 7 immortals, as they are called in China, a personal friend, confidant, and right hand of Xi Jinping. In every province, city, district, compromising material is being collected on party officials, of course, based on the people. Special websites have been opened where you can send information about anyone you want. Just in the year 2016, according to Chinese statistics, 2,800,000 signals about bribe takers came from the workers. By the way, the Chinese penal code is quite harsh about the death penalty, and this can be assessed based on the current situation with the pandemic. For example, patients with confirmed infection, as well as carriers of the pathogen, can be sentenced to death. Those who refuse quarantine and treatment or voluntarily violate the quarantine regime, as well as visit public places and transport. A special point is made for officials. The highest measure of restraint can be applied to those who will abuse their official position. For squandering, embezzlement, fraud, and other ways of illegal acquisition of goods and money intended for prevention and control of various kinds of disasters, including infectious epidemics. Chinese corruption fighters have developed their own slang, so to speak, zoological. They call the party bosses who have fallen into disgrace tigers, the cunning ones who manage to take money abroad foxes, and the small corrupt bureaucrats who take small bribes flies. The foxes attract special attention from society. According to the Academy of Social Sciences of the People's Republic of China, about 18,000 corrupt officials who had illegally appropriated about $31 billion fled from China across the border. The criminals' traces disappear in Western countries, Japan and Thailand. Today, Beijing is trying in various ways to recover these funds. In 10 months of 2019, 1,634 suspected corruption fugitives were repatriated in the People's Republic of China. This is 70% more compared to the same period last year. During the same period of 2019, law enforcement agencies managed to return $420 million of illegally obtained funds. China is constantly strengthening international anti-corruption cooperation. So, in 2014 at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Beijing, an agreement was reached to create an anti-corruption mechanism throughout the entire Asia-Pacific region. Unlike cunning foxes, small flies and confident tigers do not bother with secret accounts. They keep their loot with them. This even applies to the party elite. In 2018, 2 stories made a lot of noise. The Deputy Minister of the Mining Industry kept 33 million euros at home. They were taken out by trucks. And the Deputy Head of the Tianjin District hid valuables in frozen fish carcasses. Another interesting category is naked officials. This is a leader who has hidden all his money offshore, sent his family abroad, but continues to sit in his chair and take bribes. he has practically nothing in his homeland. Although he does have a Canadian or Bahamian passport, so he can move to Hong Kong at any minute, fly from there and join the army of Lees. For Beijing, combating corruption effectively alleviates social tension in China, among other benefits. The income gap between the rich and the poor in China is one of the largest in the world. Obviously, the rapid enrichment of business representatives would not have been possible without established connections with party officials. As a result, the public's anger can target high-ranking communists who are defending themselves. It's noteworthy that when, in 2012, the party leadership proposed to introduce a system of public disclosure of information about the personal status of officials in the country, 98.7% of the delegates of the All-China Assembly of People's Representatives voted against such a decision. We've met before, haven't we? Handing over power to Xi Jinping, former Chinese leader Hu Jintao spoke directly about this. If we do not solve the corruption problem, it will be fatal for the communist movement. This could lead to the fall of the party, he stated at the 18th Party Congress. Authorities now report a yearly increase in corruption cases. Recently, the population was delighted with the news that the A-class officials' prison in the north of Beijing is overcrowded. The inmates are denied visits from relatives who have nowhere to stay due to lack of space. Such is the story with corruption in China. Maybe there's something positive to take from this experience? Well, for example, how do you like the idea of building a prison for Class A officials not far from Moscow? What do you think? Write in the comments. Everyone will be interested to read. Not so long ago, China was considered a not very developed factory of the planet. A country that does not invent anything and only assembles goods according to other people's drawings. After all, international corporations moved production there to take advantage of cheap labor. But now you will see stunning footage, after which you will have no doubt that this country is now one of the world leaders in the field of science and technology. We went in the year 2012, while the whole world was fighting with, you know, what? The People's Republic of China government has spent $378 billion on applied scientific research and testing aimed at developing new products and services. And over the next 5 years, this amount will increase by 7% each year. In contrast, Russia is decreasing its R&D expenditure, which includes scientific research and experimental design work. So, examine the numbers. In the year 2020, about $7 billion were spent on them. And in 2021, they plan to spend around $6 billion. Interesting comparison of 4 and 7, isn't it? Today, every 5th published scientific article is written by Chinese scholars. And in the next 5 years, the Celestial Government plans to spend 10% more money on pure science. Moreover, this is not just fundamental science needed by no one for highbrow philosophers. Chinese science is increasingly intertwined with business. In 2019, the government announced that scientists now have the right to take a leave of up to 6 years to create their own startups. At the same time, they continue to receive their salary and benefits, and their services during this period are counted in the academic system as scientific activity. The government of Podnebesnaya creates the most favorable conditions for scientists and businessmen if they work in certain areas that the country's leadership considers a priority. Thus, in the 14th Five-Year Plan, China pays the most attention to artificial intelligence, semiconductors, quantum computers, neuroscience, and genetics. Let's figure out why exactly these areas are of primary importance and what state they are in now. Artificial intelligence. In this region, China and the United States of America are currently the two main competitors. The main advantage of the People's Republic of China in this race is 1.4 billion people, of which 1 billion are actively using the internet. People produce data, and this is the fuel on which the rocket of artificial intelligence takes off. Professor Kai-Fu Lee, one of the leading experts in the field of artificial intelligence, says China has the most users, and they produce an incredible amount of data, as Chinese life is permeated with digital services. For example, in China there are almost no credit cards and cash. Everyone uses mobile payments, that is, they produce data, on the basis of which artificial intelligence works better. Professor Li was a top artificial intelligence manager. So everyone who wants to be in the know listens to his words. According to his forecasts, in the next 50 years, artificial intelligence will become a part of any business. Companies will use it as widely as they now use the internet and data analytics. He makes such a comparison. When electricity became commonplace, cinema replaced theater and opera. Well, with the development of the internet, everyone went to YouTube and TikTok. Space is already overtaking the United States of America and the whole world now. In such a field as artificial intelligence and face recognition, this technology heavily depends on the amount of collected data, and China collects more than anyone else. There are 9 out of the 10 most watched cities and more than half of all surveillance cameras in the world. Chinese companies' leadership in facial recognition is largely due to People's Republic of China laws that encourage, rather than hinder, collecting and processing visual data. Face recognition technology is part of computer vision, and its application is not limited to just tracking citizens. It is used in medicine, unmanned vehicles, and factories. Recently, Chinese universities have created hundreds of new positions for artificial intelligence professors and opened hundreds of thousands of institutions for artificial intelligence education. Consequently, China has surpassed the United States in artificial intelligence scientific paper citations by 2020. Semiconductors. No modern technology is possible without a computer, and a computer is impossible without this little thing, a processor. It's a microchip, it's a semiconductor. In 2020, due to the pandemic, the world plunged into a microprocessor crisis. Work became remote, demand for computer equipment grew, and the world sharply needed more processors. But the production chains were disrupted by the lockdown. After all, production is a global process. Most schemes are invented in the United States, assembled in Asia, with resources mined globally. China was the first to emerge from the semiconductor crisis, as it was better prepared than others. While other countries were spending money on fighting the coronavirus, the Celestial Empire was actively buying up microprocessors. Every fifth dollar spent by China on imported products went to semiconductors, with a total of $380 billion spent on them. As a result, many countries began to experience a chip shortage, while Chinese corporations seemed to have a surplus. The whole point is that back in 2018, Donald Trump threatened to ban the sale of microchips to certain Chinese companies, and China fully realized its vulnerability. After all, China uses 60% of all microprocessors in the world for domestic market goods and for export, but only produces a third of the semiconductors it needs. If it is deprived of external supplies, all production will come to a halt. That's why boosting microprocessor production is a priority for the People's Republic of China. For example, in 2020, investments in Chinese semiconductor firms quadrupled compared to the previous year. Processor manufacturing plants are among the most complex production structures. Their creation takes a lot of time and money. In order for a plant to operate, it needs to be equipped with complex and expensive machinery, rare materials, and high-class specialists are needed. Until recently, the production of microchips was carried out by a small handful of companies that monopolized the market. But against the backdrop of a sharp shortage of chips, the market quickly democratized. Factories became necessary for everyone. So in the year 2020, not only specialized corporations like but also such tech giants were engaged in their construction, as well as in China, own processors are starting to be made by well-known smartphone and computer manufacturers around the world. And the main Chinese search engine has started manufacturing chips for smart cars. Alibaba's Jack Ma is now producing chips for artificial intelligence and cloud computing, and ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, for its servers. In short, the Chinese are taking their Achilles heel, microprocessors, very seriously, which is why they are now throwing all their resources into their production. So it's quite possible that soon China will emerge as a leader in microchip production, and then the United States will no longer be able to scare them with sanctions in this area. Quantum computing. At the end of 2019, they announced the achievement of quantum supremacy. Their quantum processor managed calculations in minutes that would take a regular supercomputer 10,000 years. And at the end of the pandemic 2020, Chinese scientists reported that their photonic quantum computer broke the record. In the calculated minutes, it handled calculations that the third most powerful supercomputer in the world would have taken 2 billion years to complete. Sounds beautiful, but so far these quantum machines are capable of little. For quantum computers to work as they should and produce reliable calculation results, they need to be completely isolated from the surrounding environment, including from temperature and electromagnetic effects. And this is physically impossible so far. That's why their calculations remain noisy, and the surrounding environment affects the accuracy of the result. To get an accurate answer, scientists correct the results of quantum calculations with other calculations, which are also very complex. Today, there are about 24 models of quantum computers, and no one knows which of them will turn out to be the most effective. For example, demonstrated quantum supremacy using superconductors, and Chinese scientists using photons. And both models work for a very narrow spectrum of tasks. Nevertheless, in the coming years, the main race will unfold in the field of practical application of imperfect, noisy quantum technologies. One of the leading contemporary scientists in the field of quantum physics is the Chinese Pan Jianwei, whom the journal calls the father of the quantum. It was he who oversaw the creation of a computer that demonstrated quantum supremacy, and in 2017, he made a breakthrough in quantum communication and cryptography. Then the Chinese satellite Michas, using a photon in a quantum state, allowed a video conference to be held between China and Vienna, which was impossible to hack. Neuroscience. It is believed that in the next decade, we will see a boom in new computer architectures, and one of the most promising directions is considered to be neuromorphic computers. Developers are inspired by the structure of the human brain and use it to create deep learning systems. Neuromorphic systems will be better at analyzing neurostructured information, which could bring humanity closer to creating the most powerful artificial intelligence that is, an artificial intelligence capable of thinking and self-awareness. It is such AIs that science fiction enthusiasts love to imagine. In this field, Chinese scientists from Tsinghua University, alma mater of Gensec, and Xi Jinping stand out. They were the first to present a model of neuromorphic completeness, that is, a working model of a neuromorphic computer, in several articles for the journal. They also created the Tiangenzik chip, which operates on the principle of biological neural networks and can now be integrated into autonomous bicycles. But even more interesting are the Chinese developments in the field of human brain research. The West has heard about neural implants for brain computers from Elon Musk's company. But while Musk is experimenting on pigs and monkeys, in China, not for the first year, tests are being conducted on the interaction of neuroimplants with the brains of real people. At the beginning of the 2000 years, Chinese scientists conducted experiments on drug-addicted rats and rhesus monkeys. Operations on the brains of these animals led to a noticeable reduction in dependence. In 2004 year, Chinese neurosurgeons performed no less than 1,000 operations on the brains of people suffering from opioid dependence. Overall, the experiment was considered successful, as it led to a reduction in relapses in operated drug addicts, and only some of them had noticeable side effects. And already in the 2010s, Chinese scientists moved from simple operations to techniques of neuromodulation by strengthening or suppressing brain activity with the help of devices implanted in the brain. In 2019, the world learned the story of Yan, a 33-year-old man with a methamphetamine addiction. His father brought him to the neuroclinic, giving him an ultimatum: either go back to rehab or to the neurosurgeons. Yan chose the neurosurgeons and deep brain stimulation. They drilled into his skull in 2 places, inserted electrodes into his brain, and implanted a battery pack into his chest to power the brain electrodes. Now the doctor can control the activity of the electrodes implanted in Yan's brain using a tablet application. "This machine is pure magic," says Yan. The doctor commands it to make you happy, and you feel happiness, or to make you nervous, and you get nervous. It controls your happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy. The genetics of success. Chinese geneticists are recognized by scientists all over the world. For example, China is second only to the United States of America in the number of scientific articles in the field of biomedical engineering. However, celestial genetics are linked to various scandals, primarily due to breaches of widely accepted moral and ethical standards. Thus, in the year 2001, a Chinese scientist grew rabbit embryos in the laboratory with skin cell nuclei taken from a 7-year-old boy. Embryonic stem cells could be taken from the resulting hybrids. Thanks to Chinese experiments with the clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats, Cas9 genome editing technique on monkeys, humanity has learned that the DNA of embryos circulates in the mother's blood. In 2018, Chinese biophysicist He Jiankui announced that he successfully modified the DNA of human embryos using clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. Clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats associated 9 and made them less susceptible to human immunodeficiency virus. A Chinese court harshly sentenced Jiankui for chasing fame and profit, sentenced him to 3 years in prison and fined him 3 million yuan, which is $430,000. In 2019, geneticists from the Chinese Academy of Sciences modified the genes of crab-eating macaques to induce autistic behavior in them. This helped to better understand the nature of autistic disorder. At the same time, they are already successfully cloning primates and supplying scientists around the world with 95% of transgenic monkeys for various experiments. The Chinese company is one of the world leaders in sequencing the genomes of humans, animals, and plants. Its indicative story was created by scientist Van Gyanum in 1999 as a non-governmental research institute to participate in the International Human Genome Project. And Yan closely collaborated with state universities, exchanging experience and academics. Over time, it turned into a commercial company, although cooperation with the government did not cease. Such an intertwining of private and public for Podnebesnaya is absolutely normal. It is responsible for the formation of the National Genetic Database of China, which is indirectly related to such projects. For example, the Chinese police intend to collect blood from 700 million Chinese boys and men to create a genetic database. Material is primarily collected from men, simply because they commit crimes more often than women. Such an ambitious goal was set after a successful experiment in Henan province, where the police collected blood samples from 5.5 million men over 2 years. China now owns a database of 80 million genetic profiles, the largest in the world, and it has every chance of becoming a global leader in genetics. The strength of the Chinese scientific and industrial complex lies in the joint work of the state and corporations. The government acts as a big brother, allocating scientific grants to companies, freeing them from taxes, and creating special conditions at the legislative level, provided that the goals of scientists and businessmen coincide with the goals of the party. Of course, what do you say after all this? Agree, it creates the impression that we live on different planets. But just how much is this Chinese planet with all these frightening technologies ultimately friendly to humans? And now, let's see how Beijing is unfolding a large-scale multi-million-dollar program for the propaganda of party ideology and regulation in the entertainment sphere. In recent years, the Chinese Communist Party has actively engaged in propaganda, having enriched itself through a course on market economy. Chinese citizens no longer demonstrate former unity with the party line, but have become increasingly active in consuming Western goods, as well as Western culture productions. Therefore, the Chinese authorities have a new task to take under control the most significant spheres of the economy for the country's residents. Last year was particularly fruitful from this point of view. The party took control of the Chinese sectors and online education, but the attack on technology companies was not limited to the party. After all, the revenue of the entertainment industry in China in the first year of the 2020 was approximately $357 billion, and by 2025, it will grow to $437 billion. It's no surprise that popular shows, movies, and overall Chinese entertainment have already caught the attention of the authorities. Look, these are the centers of practice of a new era civilization, distinctive Chinese cultural homes and leisure centers. Since 2018, more than 100,000 such organizations have been established in the People's Republic of China, from 2,800 in the first year to 22,000. The regional authorities of China have collectively spent more than $100 million on this large-scale project. The program of the centers is very diverse, from political information lessons to all possible educational and recreational activities. For example, the program of the Guangzhou Centers includes culinary masterclasses on local Cantonese cuisine and lectures on the latest technologies in the field of drones. In one of the Shanghai centers, they study the role of the city in key historical events of the Communist Party of China. And here there is yoga, a cappella singing, as well as a free screening of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight 2008, which was included in the city education section. About 140 million volunteers were attracted to work in them. They conduct lessons and master classes, travel to remote areas, collect folklore, and also teach rural residents financial literacy and provide a wide range of services. At first glance, these are ordinary community centers where you can learn to cook for free, watch a movie, practice yoga, or figure out how modern technologies work. But the motives of the authorities, who invest so many resources into these centers, are quite transparent. The main task of the centers is to shape new citizens with new habits, as well as to promote President Xi Jinping's ideas about specific Chinese socialism. After all, wealthy Chinese people are generally less and less interested in politics, including party activities. On the one hand, this is a sign of a stable society, but on the other hand, it cannot but disturb the authorities. To regain influence, parties use popular trends as a new format of propaganda. Also, the Chinese authorities have developed other mechanisms, with the help of which they are trying to convey their ideology not only to the citizens of the country, but to the whole world. One of such methods became the editing of foreign films. At the end of January, the cult American film 2999 was released. The Fight Club was added to a popular Chinese streaming platform, but the ending was changed to be more suitable from the perspective of the People's Republic of China authorities. In the original version, Edward Norton's character kills his imaginary alter ego Tyler Durden, who organized terrorist attacks on bank buildings, after which he sees the explosions. In the new ending, the explosions were not shown to the viewers, but before the credits, there was a message that the police had uncovered the conspiracy, arrested the criminals, and sent Durden to a mental hospital. Thus, the cult film by David Fincher, shot based on the book by no less cult writer Chuck Palahniuk, unexpectedly became 11 minutes shorter and ended with a happy ending. Judging by everything, the finale, where the authorities do not win and do not restore order, the censors found unacceptable for the Chinese audience. The change in the film's ending led to a surge of indignation in foreign media. Even more surprise was caused by the fact that the streaming platform soon returned David Fincher's original ending. Such a concession for Chinese censorship is rather a rarity. However, the cut sex scenes in the film were not returned. Of course, The Fight Club is not the only foreign film that Chinese authorities censor. China has long been influencing films, not only within the country but all over the world. And it's not surprising, as China is one of the most attractive markets for foreign films. Until the year 2020, China ranked second in box office collections after the United States of America and Canada. However, in 2020, China surpassed the United States of America and took the first place in the world in box office collections. In recent years, major releases earn more money in China than in America. Back in 2013, Xi Jinping stated that it is necessary to find new ways to tell the story of China well. Since then, in order to gain access to the profitable Chinese market, American filmmakers need to avoid certain topics, such as sex. Issues of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer plus crime, violence, or portrayals of China not in line with party standards. Films that could pose a threat to national security, harm national interests, or violate the territorial integrity of the country are not allowed. Given the allure of the Chinese market, some foreign studios themselves alter films to please Chinese regulatory authorities. As a result, some of the most famous Hollywood films exist in several versions for the world and for China. For example, in the James Bond film Skyfall of 2012, Censors demanded to cut the scene where a Chinese guard is killed, as well as mentions of sex work and police corruption. China has a very strong position, as its film industry has reached such a level that it can easily do without Hollywood production. Most of the box office revenue comes from the screening of Chinese, not foreign films. Therefore, now Western producers and directors are more interested in China than China is in them. The Chinese authorities not only show their citizens the right cinema, but also strengthen control over private media. In October of the 21st year, the main economic planning body of China, the State Committee for Development and Reform, has published a draft ban on private news media. It states that media not controlled by the state cannot collect and disseminate news on the territory of China. The ban includes private investments in information agencies, including media, publishing houses, and broadcasting companies. Therefore, in the near future, only state media may remain in China. The China Foreign Correspondents Club, which the authorities consider an illegal organization, has released a report based on its research, according to which press freedom in China is decreasing at an alarming rate. And of course, control of the information technology sector. Even back in the distant 2014, Beijing began to carefully monitor the impact of American sanctions on Russia. Therefore, when the first wide-scale United States trade sanctions hit China's economy in 2017, it was well prepared. And although the American sanctions, which deprived leading Chinese companies of the ability to purchase or manufacture chips and other components for information technology production on imported equipment, showed an unacceptable level of dependence on Western countries in the field of high technologies for Beijing. Beijing made its conclusions and counter-moves, fearing to lag behind the United States in key areas such as artificial intelligence, quantum computing. Beijing requires national technology companies to act as a single team. In fact, we are talking about educational measures designed to bend business under the banners of power. What is the educational effect? For example, in the pressure on the largest companies that we're going to conduct. About a year ago, the owner of the TikTok company postponed plans to go public for an indefinite period after a serious conversation with representatives of the People's Bank of China. Earlier, Jack Ma's End Group, which owns China's largest digital platform for payments and serves about 1 billion users only in China, faced similar difficulties. In October of 2020, the authorities forced the company to abandon the largest initial public offering in world history, and also fined it $280 billion for illegal activity, without specifying details. And the company, the main Chinese aggregator of taxis and car sharing, immediately after the initial public offering became the object of criticism from the regulator, and the company's application was removed from smartphones by users in China. The bans on conducting are driven by the authorities' desire to prevent manipulation of securities quotes, which can destabilize the macroeconomic situation in the country. Plus, starting from last spring, the Chinese Antitrust Authority has been focusing its attention on dozens of information technology companies involved in data storage. They are required to conduct internal audits and correct business practices that restrict competition, and most importantly, to tighten the rules for handling users' personal data to prevent it from leaking abroad. In Beijing, they believe that the access of American companies to information about the behavior and habits of Chinese users creates political risks. The United States of America gets the opportunity to better understand the internal political processes in China, predict the specific steps of the authorities within the country and beyond its borders, and like a cherry on top of the cake. Also, in June of the 17th year, an unprecedented law for world practice on national intelligence was adopted. It obliges all citizens and companies of China to cooperate with the institutions of the intelligence community in the matter of protecting the sovereignty and national interests of the state. Here's another red flag. In the spring of the 22nd year, in response to a new outbreak of the disease, the authorities took measures that are recognized throughout the world as unprecedented in their severity. In Shanghai, a single positive polymerase chain reaction test result is enough to take away a 2-year-old child from its mother or to euthanize pets. This is called a zero-tolerance policy. Parents separated from their children for several days cannot get information about what's happening with them. People are sealing the doors of their apartments so they don't break the isolation regime. Food is delivered to them by couriers, but they simply can't keep up with the flow of orders. As a result, those trapped inside are screaming out of the windows. And often it's not even that they're upset, but that they're hungry. And some are catching fish like this with the help of a drone. Here it is. The Chinese government has subjugated national information technology giants, surrounded ordinary citizens with care and attention from all sides, protects them from unnecessary information, selects suitable films, and teaches financial literacy. And in case of what, it can even lock you in your apartment. How effective do you think these methods are? Are they useful? In the 2000s, the main direction of the Chinese was to copy expensive brands. Here are some of the most scandalous and well-known examples. X7, which completely replicated the English Range Rover Lafan 320, which is as similar to Mini Cooper as 2 drops of water, or even Zoti SR9 in style. But how are things going with concepts on the Chinese market today? First, let's present to your attention an electric sports car. The battery packs are placed on the sides of the car for better weight distribution. And instead of a floor, there's a huge diffuser for greater downforce. Each wheel is equipped with a separate electric motor with a reducer, which overall helps to deliver a power of 1,360 horsepower. The car weighs a couple of 100 kilograms less than the same. Therefore, it has a standout acceleration dynamics of 2.7 of a second to 100 kilometers per hour. Such characteristics helped NIO become a champion among electric sports cars on the famous Nürburgring track. The next representative of this category became one which by its exterior alone gives the understanding that its design was handled by Italians. Incredible lines in the style of Lamborghini, the central location of the pilot in the manor. 4 electric motors with a total power of 1,305 horsepower. In acceleration to 100 kilometers per hour, this bolide bypassed its competitor as it accelerates to 100 in just 2 full 5/10 of a second. Despite all this, the electric motors have a decent range of 1,170 kilometers with a full fuel tank. Another successful project with the support of Europeans, this time Spaniards, has become Hypercar. The bodywork is a streamlined monocoque, available in 2 configurations. The Road Coupe has 4 electric motors with a peak power of 1,632 horsepower. The racing version has a huge rear wing and 6 electric motors, which together produce 1,200 horsepower and twice as much Newton moment. This example accelerates to 100 in 2.6 seconds, which is slightly slower than the previous model. And we'll end the review of Chinese hypercars with the most unexpected example, the Hongqi S9. In general, the Hongqi company is known for its super luxury sedans for Chinese officials, members of the government, in general, so-called limousines. But suddenly a hypercar? And in the creation of this masterpiece, you can also see the hand of Italian masters from Audi Seat and Alfa Romeo. The V8 engine with a volume of 4 liters with 2 turbochargers works in tandem with 3 electric motors. The total output is 1,400 horsepower, acceleration to 100 in just 1.9 seconds, and a top speed of over 400 kilometers per hour. It would appear more powerful and superior to all competitors, but there is a catch. The electric mode range is 40 kilometers. Of course, all these hypercars are clearly not for mere mortals, but there is good news for residents of rural Chinese backwaters. For example, and of course, these are not for mass production. This is still just a statement of grandiose intentions in this key. An aluminum electric crossover with 600 horsepower and acceleration to 100 in 5 seconds. But the most interesting solution in this model is the replaceable batteries, which are charged outside the car itself. And here, the second-generation Biteng crossover not only became an excellent competitor for NIO, but also reached the mass consumer with the design. Indeed, the Italians helped the Chinese again. And the badge is 4, Point 3 means nothing else but the acceleration time to 100 kilometers per hour. This crossover has several configurations: electric, hybrid, and gasoline versions. They all differ in cost and characteristics, and the most powerful hybrid version produces almost 450 horsepower in total. However, the Chinese love for copying hasn't gone anywhere, or let's say it has slightly transformed. Here are a couple of examples. ORA is a subsidiary company that presented its own cat concept of an electric car, which vaguely reminds something in between a Porsche Panamera and a Volkswagen Beetle. And in the salon, you will meet nothing else but artificial intelligence. Another model from the company, this time with a name that openly hints at a four-door variation of the Volkswagen Beetle, slightly sprinkled with Mini Cooper's exhaust pipes. Despite the fact that this is a concept of 2021, it is clearly created under the influence of nostalgic past. The car looks maximally old school and really resembles a retro car. Its modernity is indicated by its electric motor and a cabin full of electronics. There is also a futuristic drone from the Chinese Google Baidu. China is considered a pioneer in the issue of drone regulation. It is one of the first countries to introduce a single rule for the movement of drones throughout the country, and the local business is actively involved in the creation of autonomous cars. For example, the largest search engine Baidu showed a prototype car at an annual conference, in which the driver's seat is not designated in principle. The concept presented itself as an autonomous capsule with gull-wing doors and a large screen, a multimedia system in place of the traditional dashboard and controls. Instead of a driver, the latest Kunlun 2 chip, equipped with artificial intelligence, is in control. In total, there are more than 30 companies in China that are developing autonomous vehicles. The coronavirus did not interfere with them. Just in the first 4 months of 2020 alone, at least 10 Chinese startups received new rounds of financing. One of the most popular directions is robotaxi. Almost every major developer has their own robotaxi service. For example, in 2020, a startup received a license from the Shanghai authorities to use 100 self-driving cars for passenger transportation. In the early stages, an operator must constantly be in such cars, but he is not obliged to control the car. It is enough just to be present. Now the service is operating in test mode, and by order of the Shanghai mayor, rides for passengers are free. China is interested in developers also because the local movement differs from the European and American ones. There are significantly more pedestrians and motorcycles on the roads here, which is exactly what the computer controlling the car needs.